The sounds of the attack were deafening. The distant hum of blasters mixed with the horrifying screeches of the Zelfar as they descended upon the colony, their enormous insectoid forms looming over the crumbling defenses. Ethan Hawke, once a soldier for Earth's failing military, stood frozen on the edge of the battlements. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He had spent years hiding from his past, but that past was now catching up to him, and the galaxy's darkest forces had arrived at his doorstep. The people around him panicked, running for cover or attempting to fire back at the invaders. But it was clear, the Zelfar were too advanced, too vicious. They tore through the defenses like they were nothing more than paper. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't let this happen again. Not to the people here. Not again. A blast from a Zelfar plasma cannon tore through a nearby building, sending debris flying. He didn't have time to think. Without hesitating, he sprinted toward the nearest supply crates, grabbing an old plasma rifle left behind by the colony's militia. As he ran, his mind briefly flashed back to the experiments, the ones that had been conducted on him years ago, the ones that had transformed him into something more. He could feel it deep within his bones, the power coursing through him, waiting to be unleashed. "Ethan, no," shouted Liravos, a leader in the local resistance, and an old friend. She reached for him, but he was already running toward the front lines. "I can't just sit here and watch them die," he shouted back, his voice steady and unwavering. Lara's eyes locked with his, a mix of fear and admiration flickering in them. She knew what he was capable of, and it terrified her. Ethan dove into the chaos. He could feel the heat of the blasts on his skin, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal. His every step felt heavier, as though the weight of the galaxy itself was bearing down on him. But there was no time to question what was happening, no time to think, only to act. His rifle crackled to life as he fired, but the blasts seemed weak, ineffective against the giant creatures bearing down on the colony. With a growl of frustration, Ethan dropped the weapon and turned toward the largest of the Zelfar. The alien creature, towering over him, hissed in disdain, raising a massive clawed arm to strike. But before it could, Ethan's body moved faster than he could think. He dodged with unnatural speed, leaping behind the creature and driving his fist into its back. There was a sickening crunch as its exoskeleton cracked. The creature spun in shock, but before it could retaliate, Ethan gripped its head with both hands and, in one swift motion, snapped its neck. The sound of its death sent a shockwave through the battlefield, halting the Zelfar for a brief moment. A stunned silence fell over the scene. Ethan stood, chest heaving, eyes wide as he looked down at the lifeless body of the beast. A surge of adrenaline flooded his veins, and he realized with a chilling clarity that he was no longer just a man. He was something else, something beyond human. The surviving Zelfar hesitated, sensing the shift. But it was too late. The humans, emboldened by the sudden hope of their new protector, began to rally. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan Hawke, once an ordinary soldier, stood ready to lead them into a new chapter of the galaxy's tumultuous history. The battle on the colony was far from over, but in the aftermath of Ethan's display of strength, a strange sense of silence settled over the wreckage. The surviving Zelfar had retreated, momentarily stunned by the unexpected resistance. Humanity, once believed to be weak and defenseless, now had someone, to rally behind. Ethan stood amid the smoke and rubble, panting heavily, his body buzzing with the aftereffects of his actions. He could feel it now, coursing through his veins, the raw power, the unnatural speed, the strength far beyond anything he had ever known. It was as if every cell in his body was alive with energy, burning with an intensity he could barely comprehend. How did you do that?" Lyra's voice broke through the haze. She was standing beside him now, her face a mixture of awe and fear. Ethan wiped blood from his brow, his eyes still focused on the distant horizon. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice rough. "But I can feel it. It's like something inside me is waking up." Lyra reached out, cautiously placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not the same anymore, Ethan. What was that? You fought like a monster." Ethan finished for her, his voice tinged with bitterness. "I don't know. All I know is, I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to protect the people here." Lyra frowned, studying his face closely. "You did more than that. You saved us. But whatever you are now, it's not normal. The Zelfar were terrified of you. That was more than just sheer power. It was something else." Ethan's gaze hardened. He hadn't told anyone about the experiments, not even Lyra. But the memories came flooding back now, unbidden. The quiet, sterile rooms of a military lab, the doctors who had injected him with unknown substances, the endless tests, the hours of isolation. He had been part of a secret program, one designed to create the perfect soldier. But they hadn't told him what they were making. They hadn't told him how far they'd gone, how far they'd pushed him. And now, it was clear, the experiments had worked. He turned away, pushing the memories down, focusing instead on the situation at hand. The battle might be over, but the war was just beginning. "We need to move," Ethan said, his voice now steely with resolve. "The Zelfar will come back, and we need to be ready." Lyra hesitated, watching him closely. She had seen soldiers before, tough, battle-hardened veterans who had fought with everything they had. But there was something different about Ethan, something unsettling. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something more. And as much as she wanted to trust him, she couldn't help but wonder what he was becoming. Ethan turned and began to walk toward the remnants of the colony's command center. "If we're going to fight back, we need to learn everything we can about the Zelfar, their plans, their weaknesses. I'm not going to stop until they pay for what they've done." Lyra watched him go, her heart heavy with the weight of what he had become. She had known Ethan as a man who once fought for honor, for duty. But this was something else entirely. And she feared it might be more dangerous than any enemy they faced. In the days that followed the battle, Ethan's transformation became more undeniable. The colony, once a quiet backwater on the edge of galactic civilization, was now a symbol, a beacon of resistance. The Zelfar, defeated but not destroyed, had retreated temporarily, but everyone knew they would return. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something larger was at play, something far beyond the attack on his home. As word of his abilities spread, human resistance cells across the galaxy began to make contact, sending messages of both hope and fear. They saw what he had done, how he had turned the tide of a losing battle, and they believed he was the key to rallying a galactic revolution. Ethan had become a symbol of defiance, a single human, defying the odds and the expectations of countless alien empires. Yet, with that power came something else: expectation. Leaders of the human resistance sought him out, urging him to take the mantle of a hero, a general to lead them all. But as he trained with their forces and prepared for the inevitable second wave of Zelfar, Ethan struggled with the pressure. He knew what he was capable of, but did that make him a savior or a weapon? In the quiet of the night, alone in a forgotten training room, Ethan reflected on his transformation. The surge of power that had first erupted in him was growing, stronger and more controlled. It felt like something inside him was waking up, but he couldn't control it fully. Every time he fought, every time he used his abilities, the power felt more insistent, more demanding. Would he eventually lose himself to it? His thoughts were interrupted when Lyra approached, her boots heavy on the metal floor. She had been avoiding him for days, ever since the battle. Ethan knew she was watching him closely, waiting for him to show signs of losing himself, or worse, to become the very thing he was fighting against. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady but wary. "I've been talking to the other resistance leaders. They want you to be our symbol, the face of the rebellion. They think you can unite the humans and other species under our cause." He shook his head, looking at her sharply. "I'm not a symbol, Lyra. I'm just trying to survive. I don't want to be anyone's hero. Not if it means becoming the thing I was made to be." Lyra took a step closer, her expression softening. "I know what you're feeling. But you're not just surviving, Ethan. You're giving people hope. And that's what we need more than anything right now. Hope." She hesitated before continuing, her voice quieter. "You're not alone in this. None of us are." Ethan met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. Hope. It was a word he hadn't thought about in years, not since Earth had fallen into its fractured state, not since his own life had crumbled. But in the brief moments since the battle, he had seen something he hadn't expected: unity. The human spirit, in its rawest form, had risen up, proving to him that no matter how brutal the galaxy became, humanity had the power to fight back. For the first time, Ethan realized that he wasn't just a weapon anymore. He could lead. He could inspire. He could make a difference, not by simply destroying the enemies before him, but by igniting the spark of something far greater. A united front that could stand against the galaxy's most powerful empires. A surge of energy rushed through him, but this time, it felt controlled, directed. He was still learning how to wield this power, but one thing was certain. It wasn't just his strength that would turn the tide. It was humanity's will. "All right," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's take the fight to them." The days following Ethan's pledge to lead the rebellion were filled with planning, strategy, and rapid mobilization. The human resistance forces, once scattered and fractured, began to coalesce under his leadership. But even as hope surged, Ethan couldn't shake the growing sense that something was off. Despite their victories, the Zelfar hadn't fully committed to a direct counterattack, and the Avenari, genetically engineered super soldiers, were curiously absent from the front lines. It was almost as if the galaxy's powers were biding their time, waiting for something. Lyra, ever the tactician, had spent hours poring over intercepted transmissions, decrypting enemy communications. She had uncovered something that chilled her to the core. The Zelfar were not just warlords seeking to dominate the galaxy. They were pawns in a much larger game. And the true puppet masters, the ones pulling the strings, were far more powerful and ancient than they had ever imagined. "Ethan," Lyra said one evening, her voice tight with urgency as she approached him in the war room. "I found something. Something I think you need to see." Ethan followed her to the large holographic table, where several decrypted files hovered in midair. His eyes scanned the data, piecing together fragments of information that had been carefully hidden. What Lyra had found wasn't just about the Zelfar. It was about Earth's government. "These files," she continued, pointing to a series of encrypted documents, "are from a hidden program, one that predates the war. It involves the collaboration between Earth's highest officials and the Zelfar. They were working together for decades." Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The pieces fell into place, but the reality of it was almost too much to comprehend. The experiments, his transformation, the enhanced soldiers, the manipulation of human DNA. It wasn't just some rogue initiative gone wrong. It had been part of a plan, a long-term strategy. "Earth's leadership," Ethan muttered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rage. They knew about this from the start." Lyra nodded grimly. "Not just knew. They helped create it. The Zelfar didn't attack Earth by accident. They were invited. And you were part of that plan." Ethan's mind reeled. He had always believed that the experiments were a betrayal, a covert operation gone awry, something carried out by a handful of rogue military officials. But the truth was far darker. His own government had been in bed with the very forces that had enslaved and oppressed the galaxy for centuries. They hadn't just been surviving. They had been playing a role in the grand scheme of galactic power. "But why?" Ethan demanded, fists clenched. "Why would they do this? What's the endgame?" Lyra stepped back, her gaze intense. I think they were grooming humanity for a much larger purpose. To create an army of humans strong enough to serve as a new weapon, a bargaining chip. The Zelfar weren't just after resources, Ethan. They were after us. And the Avenari, they were supposed to be the ultimate soldiers, born from your DNA. A cold realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. The Avenari are me, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. They were made from my genetic blueprint. Lyra's expression softened, understanding the weight of his words. The Avenari weren't the first. You were the first. You were meant to be the prototype, the ultimate human weapon. And now, you're more than just a soldier. You're a threat to everything they've built. Ethan's gaze hardened. He had been nothing more than a tool in a larger, more insidious game. But now, the game had changed. He wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. We take this to them, Ethan said, his voice firm and determined. We expose the truth. We tear it all down. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, but Ethan had made his decision. The fight wasn't just against the Zelfar, the Avenari, or any alien empire. It was a fight against those who had betrayed humanity's trust, who had used him and his people as tools for their own gain. He wasn't just going to lead a rebellion. He was going to dismantle the corrupt system and expose the truth to the entire galaxy. Ethan stood in the dimly lit war room, the weight of the revelations pressing down on him like a physical force. The walls of the room seemed to close in, and despite the flickering holographic maps of galactic star systems and enemy locations, his mind couldn't focus. He had always fought for Earth, for the ideals of freedom and justice. Now, he wondered if those ideals had ever been real, or if they had simply been another part of the illusion. Lyra stood beside him, her face grim as she watched the holographic data unfold. They were preparing to make their move, to strike at the heart of the conspiracy that had betrayed them. But with every plan, every piece of intel they gathered, the stakes grew higher. The more Ethan learned, the more he realized just how deep the corruption ran. We have to act fast, Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. If we can get this information to the right people, we can spark a full-scale rebellion. The galaxy will have no choice but to rise up. Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched in frustration. He wasn't just thinking about the rebellion anymore. He wasn't even thinking about the galaxy. His thoughts were consumed with the question that had haunted him since the first moment he'd uncovered the truth. How do we know who we can trust, Lyra? He asked, his voice laced with bitterness. Earth betrayed us. The government betrayed me. They made me into a weapon. How do we know we're not just trading one set of masters for another? Lyra's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. I know it's hard, but there are people out there who still believe in what we fought for. There are humans, and other species, who want to see a free galaxy, not one ruled by the Zelfar or anyone else. You have to believe in them, Ethan. In all of us. Ethan's gaze remained distant. His transformation had been painful, both physically and mentally. But the pain was nothing compared to the betrayal that had come with it. His mind flashed to the Avenari, those genetically engineered soldiers who had been created from his own DNA. They were living weapons, meant to be the galaxy's perfect soldiers. Now he knew they weren't just rivals in battle. They were twisted versions of himself. And if he couldn't defeat them, he would become one of them. Everything I've fought for, Ethan murmured, more to himself than to Lyra, feels like it was built on lies. Every time I fight, every time I push my power to its limit, I'm afraid I'm becoming something else. Something I don't recognize. Lyra's eyes locked onto his, full of understanding and empathy. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. This is bigger than us, Ethan. It's about everyone who's been forced into this fight. The innocents, the lost colonies, the forgotten worlds. You're not the monster they made you into. You're the man who can change it all. The words resonated with Ethan, but the doubt still gnawed at him. The Avenari were out there, hunting for him, learning from his every move. They were the perfect soldiers, designed to be more than just warriors. They were the ultimate human weapon. And somewhere, deep inside, Ethan knew that if the galaxy was going to stand a chance, he would have to confront them head-on. Just as Lyra was about to speak again, the war room door slid open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Commander Orin, a grizzled veteran of the Resistance, his face worn and weathered by years of fighting. His presence was commanding, and as he approached, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "We've received a transmission," Orin said, his voice low and urgent. "It's from a source inside the heart of the Zelfar Command. They're planning something big, something we've never seen before." Ethan straightened, his instincts kicking in. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He needed to find out everything. What the Zelfar had been hiding, who their real allies were, and how far the conspiracy had spread. "Show me," Ethan said, his voice like steel. As the transmission began to play, the truth became clearer. The Zelfar were preparing a weapon of unimaginable power, something that could wipe out entire planets in a single strike. And the worst part, it was not a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of control, designed to enslave entire civilizations. "Ethan," Lyra said, her voice tight, "this changes everything." Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the hologram. The enemy was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But now, with the knowledge of their plan, there was only one choice left. We stopped them, no matter the cost. The transmission had left Ethan reeling, the implications of the Zelfar's new weapon spinning in his mind like a web he couldn't escape. A weapon designed not to destroy, but to control. It was a chilling thought, and one that made the stakes of their rebellion far greater than any of them had imagined. If the Zelfar succeeded in deploying it, they wouldn't just conquer the galaxy. They would enslave it. Whole civilizations would bend to their will, including humanity, reduced to nothing more than puppets in the hands of their alien masters. The Resistance was rallying, but there was no time to waste. The Zelfar weapon was nearing completion, hidden deep within a fortress-like facility on the planet Syraxis, an isolated world within their empire. The plan was simple: strike fast, infiltrate the facility, and destroy the weapon before it could be activated. But as always, simplicity was the first casualty of war. Ethan stood at the front of the war room, staring at the map of Syraxis on the holotable. The facility was heavily guarded, surrounded by mines, anti-air defenses, and a fleet of warships in orbit. Any approach would be met with overwhelming force. But it wasn't just the Zelfar Ethan was worried about. It was the Avenari, genetically engineered super soldiers who were not only faster, stronger, and more resilient than normal humans, but who were also hunting him. They had learned from him, adapted to his abilities, and now they were his equals in every way. "We've only got one shot at this," Lyra said, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. She was scanning the plan for any weaknesses, any loopholes that could give them an edge. "The Avenari won't give us an inch, and we'll be facing at least 3 of them before we even get to the weapon." Ethan didn't flinch. His mind was already racing through possible strategies, calculating the risks, weighing the lives of his team against the necessity of stopping the weapon. But there was no time for hesitation. Every moment was precious. "We don't need to fight them all," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We just need to take down their command center and disrupt the weapon. If we do that, the rest of the Zelfar forces will be scattered." Lyra nodded, though she knew the plan was risky. But it was their only option. "I'll coordinate with the ground teams. We'll need to hit them hard and fast, disable the anti-air systems, and get the extraction ready." Ethan turned his gaze to her, his eyes hard. "I'll take care of the Avenari. You focus on the mission." Lyra opened her mouth to argue, but one look from Ethan silenced her. There was no room for debate. The Avenari were his responsibility. They were his creations, and he knew them better than anyone. But deep down, he understood the weight of what he was about to do. If he couldn't stop the Avenary, if he couldn't control his powers, he feared he might become the very thing he was fighting. The plan was set into motion within hours. The fleet assembled, and the teams made their final preparations. Ethan's mind was focused, but a sense of dread lingered in his chest. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. As their ships cut through the atmosphere of Syraxis, Ethan's thoughts turned inward. The battlefield was changing, and with every fight, he was becoming less certain of where he stood. The power that surged through him, the same power that had saved lives and killed his enemies, was becoming harder to control. Every time he used it, he felt himself slipping, like the monster inside him was clawing to break free. But there was no time for doubts. The moment their boots hit the ground on Syraxis, the battle erupted. The resistance fought with everything they had, pushing forward against the overwhelming Zelfar defenses. Ethan was a whirlwind, moving faster than humanly possible, tearing through soldiers and Avenari alike with brutal efficiency. But even as his body moved with unnatural speed, his mind was always one step ahead. He could feel the Avenari closing in. A growl rumbled in his throat as the first of the genetically engineered soldiers appeared, their imposing forms silhouetted against the burning sky. They were faster than he remembered, their eyes gleaming with the same cold intelligence that Ethan knew all too well. And they were coming for him. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he charged toward them. He had prepared for this moment, but as his feet hit the ground, a voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning, something he had been trying to ignore. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his humanity. The battle on Syraxis had erupted into chaos. The sky was alive with explosions, ships spiraling down in flames, and the air crackling with gunfire, and the screech of laser blasts. Resistance fighters pushed forward, their assault forces making their way toward the Zelfar command facility. But Ethan didn't have time to think about the bigger picture. His focus was on the Avenari, the genetically engineered super soldiers who had once been a part of him, a twisted reflection of his own strength. They were closing in. He moved through the chaos like a blur, faster than any normal soldier could possibly be, his mind sharp and calculating. The first Avenari lunged at him, faster than any human could react, but Ethan was already there. His fist collided with the creature's chest, sending it hurtling backwards with the force of a freight train. It hit the ground hard but was up again in an instant, its inhumanly fast reflexes kicking in as it leaped toward him. But this time, Ethan wasn't backing down. The surge of energy within him flared, and with it, a deep guttural roar left his throat. He met the Avenari head-on, blocking its strike, and then delivering a series of devastating blows. His body moved almost instinctively, guided by the power coursing through him. The Avenari staggered, but its body was tough, resilient. It wasn't as easy to defeat as any other soldier. The second Avenari appeared then, flanking Ethan with ruthless precision. Ethan could feel the presence of the third Avenari nearby, waiting, watching, ready to join the fight. The odds were stacked against him, but Ethan wasn't about to back down. His senses heightened, and the world around him slowed as he honed in on his enemies. He knew them too well. They were his brothers and sisters, born of his own DNA. And though they shared his strength, they didn't share his humanity. That was the difference. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what he was becoming growing heavier with each passing second. But he refused to let fear control him. This was his fight, the one he had been destined for. His purpose wasn't to run from this, but to face it head-on. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for his soul. With a surge of adrenaline, Ethan ducked under the Avenari's fist, his own hand grabbing the creature's arm in midair. He twisted, using its momentum against it, and sent it crashing into the ground. But as he turned to face the other Avenari, the third one struck. It was fast, faster than anything Ethan had faced before. The blow knocked him off balance, sending him sprawling across the battlefield. For a moment, everything went dark. His mind swam with disorienting flashes, pain shooting through his body like a torrent. He gasped for air, trying to rise, but the weight of the world seemed to press down on him. The Avenari were relentless. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. It was only when the first Avenari lunged toward him again that Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he was on his feet in a split second. The fight was far from over. But this time, something in Ethan shifted. The voice in his head that had been growing louder, the part of him that feared what he was becoming, quieted. He realized, with a sudden clarity, that the fight wasn't just about defeating the Avenari. It was about controlling the power within him. It was a weapon, yes, but it was also part of who he was. He had to stop running from it. He had to accept it. With newfound resolve, Ethan pushed forward, tapping into every ounce of strength and speed that surged within him. The Avenari were no longer just enemies. They were a part of him, and now he would use that connection to destroy them. His movements became a blur. One by one, he took down the Avenari, each strike calculated, precise, and devastating. The third Avenari tried to match him blow for blow, but it was too late. Ethan was no longer just reacting. He was in control. With a final, explosive punch, he drove his fist into the chest of the last Avenari, its body crumpling under the force. Breathing heavily, Ethan stood over the fallen bodies, his heart racing, his mind reeling. He had done it. The Avenari were no more. But the battle was far from over. Ethan turned toward the Zelfar facility in the distance, smoke rising from the ruined landscape. Lara's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Ethan, we've breached the facility. We're almost to the weapon. Are you clear?" "Clear," he answered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I'll hold the line. Get the weapon." His resolve hardened. This was the moment. The Avenari were gone, but the galaxy still hung in the balance. He could feel the pull of the weapon, the source of all this destruction, and he knew what he had to do. This was his fight now, not just for humanity, but for everything he had once believed in. As he marched toward the heart of the Zelfar base, a single thought echoed in his mind. This ends today. The heart of the Zelfar facility loomed ahead, a fortress of cold metal and sharp angles, bathed in the flickering glow of fire from the battlefield outside. Ethan's mind was focused, his steps sure, despite the exhaustion and the chaos that had enveloped Syraxis. The fight was far from over, but the moment of truth was near. Lyra's voice crackled again in his ear, urgency in her tone. "Ethan, we're almost there. We've disabled most of their defenses, but we're running out of time. The weapon is ready to fire. You need to stop it now." Ethan's jaw tightened as he glanced at the facility's towering gates, the path ahead littered with the smoldering wreckage of Zelfar soldiers and scattered debris. The last of the Avenari were gone, but the weapon that had started this war, the weapon that had threatened to enslave entire galaxies, was still out there. And he knew exactly where it was. The corridors inside the facility were silent, but the deeper he went, the more intense the feeling of danger became. His instincts screamed at him, his mind buzzing with the awareness that every step he took brought him closer to the heart of the Zelfar's dark plan. Yet despite the certainty of his mission, there was a deep unease gnawing at him. He had already faced the worst of it. The Avenari, the betrayal of his own people, and the monstrous weapon they had been building. But now, he understood the true nature of the battle he was fighting. The weapon wasn't just a tool of war. It was a symbol of everything humanity had come to represent. Control, subjugation, and manipulation. These were the forces that had shaped his existence, and now, with a single move, he could end it all. But there was one question still burning in his mind. What would humanity become if the war ended? Would it be a free galaxy, or would they simply replace one oppressor with another? He pushed the thoughts aside. There was no more time for doubt. Finally, he arrived at the control room. Inside, the weapon stood, a massive machine, pulsing with dark energy. At the center, a shimmering core of pure power hummed with a sinister glow. It was the source of all the pain, the suffering, and the twisted ambitions that had driven this war. The controls were straightforward, but the moment he touched the panel, a cold voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that was both familiar and foreign. "Did you think you could stop this, Ethan? Did you really believe you could end it all?" Ethan froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He knew that voice. It was his. Or rather, it was the voice of someone who shared his blood. He turned, and there, standing in the shadows of the chamber, was the last Avenary. But this one was different. Its eyes gleamed with a cold intelligence, and its features mirrored Ethan's own more closely than any of the others. This was no ordinary soldier. This was the true Avenary, the one created to surpass him, to destroy him. "You were always meant to be the weapon, Ethan," the Avenary spoke, its voice laced with a mocking tone. "But now you've become something else. Do you think you can escape your destiny?" Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low and firm. "I'm not your weapon, and I'm not anyone's pawn." The Avenary smiled, its expression twisted with the same cold calculation that had defined their shared history. "We are the same, Ethan. We always have been. And now, you have a choice. You can destroy this weapon, destroy everything, and condemn the galaxy to endless chaos. Or you can take control, harness its power, and reshape the universe in your image. The choice is yours." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Ethan's thoughts raced as he weighed the consequences of his decision. The temptation to wield this power, to control the fate of billions, was almost overwhelming. But he knew what he had to do. He had been given a gift, a curse, perhaps, and it was his responsibility to end this madness. "No," he said quietly, shaking his head. "I won't become like you. I won't become a tool of destruction." With that, Ethan reached forward and slammed his fist into the control panel. Sparks flew as the systems short-circuited, and the core began to destabilize. The Avenary lunged at him, but this time, Ethan was ready. With a single brutal strike, he sent the creature flying across the room, crashing into the walls. It was over. As the machine sputtered and began to collapse in on itself, Ethan turned and walked toward the exit, his heart heavy but resolute. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy would have to rebuild. And as for him, he had become something greater than a weapon, something stronger than any enemy he had faced. He was free.